Welcome to the Gauss-Jordan method for 3x3 matrices. So in this video, we're going to show how you can solve 3x3 matrices using the Gauss-Jordan method. There are other methods, but we'll just be discussing this particular method today. There's another video on how to use this method for 2x2 matrices. And so this is just expanding that idea to a slightly larger matrix. So here is the method. The first thing you want to do once you write your matrix from your system of equations is to obtain a 1 in the upper left-hand corner, or in position A11. And then each double, so A11, A22, A33, all of those are going to end up with 1s. But what you want to do is work down each column. So you'll start with the first column and you'll get a 1 in the top left-hand position. So I can show you on the identity matrix. Your first step is to make that be a 1 if it's not already. And then you zero out everything below that 1. Then you look at the second column. A22 should be a 1. Everything above and below that will be zeros. And then once you finish with the second column, you'll go to the third column and you'll get a 1 in position A33. And then everything above that will be zeros. And once you get your coefficient matrix to this identity matrix, then you'll know that you're done. That's the end of the Gauss-Jordan method. So at the bottom you will see a URL. This is the OpenStax College Algebra textbook that I used as a reference for the wording and the examples contained in the video. So this first one, you can see that we have 3 equations, which means our matrix will have 3 rows. And you can see that there are 3 variables, x, y, and z, as well as the solutions or the constants on the right. So we will have 4 columns. So we will write this as a matrix. So -2, 3, -2, 3, 4, 2, -1, 9, and 4, -8, 2, -6. Now I didn't mention, but you should make sure you check to make sure that each equation is in standard form. And you want to make sure your variables are lined up with one another. So all of the x's should be in the first column, all of the y's are in the second column, all of the z's are in the third column, and your constants are on the right. And so all of the equations were already set up in standard form, so I didn't have to adjust those prior to putting them in a matrix. Okay, so first step, we're looking at the first column, and we want A11 to be a 1. So we're trying to get A11, which is a -2, to be a 1. Remember, your goal here is to simply divide or multiply by some constant to make that a 1. And so I think of division automatically. I would divide by a -2. But remember, dividing by a -2 is the same as multiplying by a -1/2. So we're going to multiply row 1 by a -1/2. So that's going to give me a 1, -3/2, a 1, and -3/2. And then the other rows, I'm not changing yet. Okay, so once I get that 1, my next step is to zero out everything below that 1. Now in this case, it's nice that both of the numbers under the 1 are 4s, because then I can multiply that top row by a -4 and then add it to each of the rows under it. And that will zero out both of those rows. So let's see, we're going to do -4 times row 1. So whichever row has the 1 that you just got, in this case, the first row, you multiply that row by the opposite of whatever you're trying to zero out. And so since I'm trying to get the 4 to be a 0, I would multiply the top row by a -4. Once you do that, you add it to the row you're trying to zero out, and you replace that row. Okay. At the same time, so I'm going to do that row operation, but I'm also going to go ahead and do the third row as well, because it's actually the same exact process, because they're both 4s, which is really nice. So if I multiply the first row by -4, I will have a -4, -3, I got to multiply that by 4 as well, a -4. So -4 times -3 is +12, and 12 over 2 is 6. And then -4 times 1 is -4. -4 times -3/2. So multiply straight across, you get a +12 over 2, which is +6. Okay, so that's what I would have there. And then I'm just going to add that to row 2 and replace it. And I'm going to add that to row 3 and replace row 3. So I'm going to do both of those operations at the same time. All right, so the first row is not changing. Remember, what I put in red is just what you're thinking about in order to zero out the other rows. You're not actually changing row 1. You're just using that transformation to affect the other rows. So -4 plus 4 is 0. And if you'd like, you can put it here. Okay. What I'm doing is +6 plus 6, -4 minus 4, +6 plus 6. Okay, so I'm just taking the numbers that I found in red and adding it to each element so that I can kind of see what I'm doing. And again, normally you have to do 2 separate row operations because your numbers will be different. Like A21 will be different from A31. And so you have to find a different scalar to multiply a row by. But in this case, they were the same. So 2 plus 6 is 8. -1 minus 4 is -5. 9 plus 6 is 15. And now the third row, I'm going to have 4 minus 4 is 0. -8 plus 6 is -2. 2 minus 4, -2. And -6 plus 6, 0. All right, so now my first column is done. So I can move on to my second column. Remember that in your second column, you want A22 to be a 1. So that's what I'm doing now. So in order to get that 8 to be a 1, I'm simply going to divide by 8, right? 8 divided by 8 is 1. And again, you can think about that as multiplying by 1/8. So 1/8 times row 2. So row 1 stays the same. Okay. Row 2 is changing. I'm multiplying it by 1/8. So that will still be 0. 8 times 1/8 is 1. -5 times 1/8, -5/8. And 15 times 1/8 is 15/8. And then the third row stays the same for now. Okay, so now I've gotten a 1 in the position I want in the second column, and now it's time to zero out everything above and below it. Notice that above the 1 is a -3/2, and below the 1 is a -2. So I'm going to have to multiply by different scalars in order to zero those out. So let's just deal with the first row first. So what I'm going to do, I want to zero out the -3/2. So the second row is the row with the 1. I'm going to multiply that row by the opposite of what I want to zero out. So since I want to zero out a -3/2, I'm going to multiply a +3/2 by the row with the 1. So +3/2 times row 2. And then I'm going to add that to the row that I want to zero out. That's row 1. And I'm going to replace row 1 with that. So let's see what I get. So row 2 and 3 are not changing. So I'm just going to copy those down. Okay. And now what I want to do is multiply everything in row 2 by 3/2. So 0 times 3/2 is still 0. So I'm going to be adding 0 to the top. 1 times 3/2 is 3/2. So I'm going to be adding 3/2 to the second element in the top row. Negative 5/8 times 3/2, that's going to be negative 15/16. So I'm going to be subtracting 15/16. Let me make sure that's clear. So minus 15/16. And then negative 3/2, I'm going to see what 15/8 times 3/2 is. So that will be 45/16. So I'm going to be adding 45/16 to that last element. So 1 plus 0 is 1. Negative 3/2 plus 3/2 is 0. 1 minus 15/16. You can use a calculator, or you can do it mentally, or you can find a common denominator. So 1 is 1 over 1 minus 15/16. Your common denominator would be 16, so scale up. 16/16 minus 15/16 would be 1/16. And then we have negative 3/2. Let me erase that work. All right, we have negative 3/2 plus 45/16. So the common denominator is 16, so scale up by 8. So that will be negative 24/16 plus 45/16. So that is 21/16. So that is the last element of that row. Okay, so now we've gotten a 1 and 1 0. We need to make that negative 2 in A32 a 0 as well. So we're going to do that. We want to multiply the row that has the 1 in it by the opposite of what we want to 0 out. Okay, so let's see what that means. We're going to multiply row 2 by a positive 2. So 2 times row 2 plus, we're trying to 0 out row 3, and then we're going to replace row 3. All right, so we're going to multiply row 2 by 2. So times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. And then we're going to add that product to row 3. So 0 times 2 is 0. So we'll have 0 plus 0. So that's still going to be 0. 2 times 1 is 2, so negative 2 plus 2. Then we have negative 5/8 times 2, that's negative 10/8. And then we have 15/8 times 2/1, so that would be plus 30/8. Okay, so 1 0 1/16, 21/16. Second row does not change either, so 0 1 negative 5/8, 15/8. And then the last row is going to change. So 0 plus 0 is 0. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. We have negative 2 minus 10/8. So we can scale this up by 8. So that would be negative 16/8 minus 10/8, which would be negative 26/8, which would reduce to negative 13/4. So negative 13/4. And again, feel free to use your calculator to do these calculations. That's fine. We have 0 plus 30 over 8, so that's just going to be 30 over 8, and we would reduce that to 15/4. Oh man, all right, we've got it going now. So we've got the first row done, the first column done, the second column done, and now we need to finish by doing the third column. So we want the number in position A33 to be a 0. So in this case, that is -13/4. And so to accomplish that, we're going to multiply that row, row 3, by the reciprocal. So if we did -13/4 divided by -13/4, we would get 1. And dividing by a number is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal. So we would multiply by -4/13. And then we're going to find out what we get when we scale up like that. So the first row does not change at this point. The second row does not change. And then the third row is going to change by a multiple of -4/13. So zeros don't change. That's going to be a 1. And then 15/4, so 15/4 times -4/13. The 4s will cancel out, so it'll be -15/13. All right, so the good news is the third row, and I do mean row, is done because we have 2 zeros and a 1, and then we know what z is, right? Because that third row tells us that z equals a -15/13. And so now to finish up, we just want to make everything above that 1 be a 0 so that we can easily see the values for x and y. Okay, so let's start with, I guess, row 1. So row 1 has a 1/16 that I want to be a 0. And so we're going to multiply the third row by the opposite of that. So -1/16 times row 3 plus the row we're trying to zero out, that's row 1, and we're going to replace row 1 with that. Okay, so -1/16 times row 3. So that's going to be really easy for the zeros, right? And really easy for the 1. Okay, and add that to the top. So that's plus 0, plus 0, -1/16, and then -15 times -1 is +15, and then 13 times 16, let me see what that is. 208. Okay, so 15 over 208. So now I want to figure out what that's going to give me and put it in my new matrix with the new row 1. So I'll have 1, 0, 0, and then I have 21 over 16 plus 15 over 208. And again, feel free to use your calculator. 208 is the common denominator, so I can multiply both of these by 13. So 21 times 13 is 273. And 13 times 16 is 208. Plus 15 over 208. So 273 plus 15 is equal to 288 over 208. And let's see how far I can reduce that. So if I reduce by 4, I will get 72 on the bottom. Oh, nope, 72 on the top. And then let's see, 208 divided by 4 is 52. I can still divide by at least 2, so I've got to do that. So that'll be 26 on the bottom and 36 on the top. I can divide by 2 again. So that'll be 18 over 13. And I think I'm finally done. So 18 over 13. That means that's my x value. That's my answer for x. Okay. This can get pretty nasty with all the fractions, so it's important that you try to be as organized as possible so that you don't make mistakes. It's difficult, but you just have to do your best. All right, we got one more thing to do. This negative 5/8, we need to be a 0. Oops. So I'm going to multiply the row with the 1, that's row 3, by the opposite, so that'd be a positive 5/8. And then I'm going to add that to the row I want to 0 out, that's row 2. And then I'm going to replace row 2 with that. All right, so my first row is unchanged, so I can put that in. Now let's find the second row. So 5/8 times row 3. So I'm going to multiply each element of row 3 by 5/8. And then whatever I find for that product, I'm going to add that to row 2. So this will be plus 0, plus 0, plus 5/8. And then let's see what this is. 15 times 5 is 75. So that'll be minus 75 over 13 times 8 is 104. Okay, so 0 plus 0, 0. 1 plus 0, 1. Negative 5/8 plus 5/8 zeroes out, thank goodness, because that was the whole point of what we were doing. And then 15/8 minus 75 over 104. So 104, we can make 104 be our common denominator. So I can scale up the first fraction by 13. 13 times 15 is 195 over 13 times 8 is 104 minus 75 over 104. And then 195 minus 75 is 120. And now I need to try to reduce. So I can reduce by dividing by 4. So 120 divided by 4 is 30. 104 divided by 4 is 26. And again, your calculator will do this for you, but I'm just doing it by hand in case you need to know how to do it by hand. So 15/13 is lowest terms, and then the last row stays the same. All right, so we have our identity matrix for the coefficient matrix. So that is the first 3 columns is the identity matrix. And so remember that the first column tells you x, the second column is y, the third column is z, and the solutions or the constants are on the right. So since we have the first row with 0 y's and 0 z's and just 1 x, that tells us that x equals 18/13. Same reasoning for the second row. Y is positive 15/13. And the third row tells us that z is a negative 15/13. And so since you have 3 variables, you can give your answer like this, or you can give your answer as an ordered triple. And so x goes first, y goes second, and then z goes third. And that is the solution to number 1, the first system of equations. All right, that took us a while. So these are going to take you some time. Obviously, when you get better at the operations, it might go a little faster. But, just plan on these taking some time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and erase this so that I have space to start number 2. Okay, so same directions as above. we want to solve using the Gauss-Jordan method. So first thing, I notice that everything is in standard form, but do notice that the last equation is missing the z variable, and that just means that the coefficient is 0. So we're going to have to put that 0 in the matrix. So our augmented matrix will be -1, -2, 2, -2, 3, 6, -3, 3, and 1, 1, 0, 2. So the first thing that I want to do is get the top left-hand corner to be a 1. That's the element in position A11. So right now we have a -1 in that position. But notice that the bottom row has a 1 there. Rather than doing some complicated row operation, I can just switch rows. So at this point, that's exactly what I want to do. I want to interchange row 1 with row 3. I'm just going to switch them out. So I have 1, 1, 0, 2 as my first row. And then the second row is staying the same. And then the third row is now going to be -1, -2, 2, -2. Okay, so just by switching those two rows, I now have a 1 in position A11. And so I would strongly encourage you to pause the video and try this on your own if you feel at all comfortable that you might be able to get, some of it done or all of it done. And then you can just check your work against what I have in the video. And you can just scroll to the end and see, and if you don't get it right, or you don't get the same thing as me, you can watch the steps and see if you, or possibly I, made a mistake. Okay, so again, we got a 1 in A11. Remember, we're working on the first column, so we want everything under that 1 to be a 0 now. So we're going to multiply the row with the 1, so row 1, by the opposite of whatever we want to 0 out. So the first thing I'm going to 0 out is the 3 in A21. So I want to multiply by a -3. I'm going to then add that to the row I'm 0ing out and replacing that row. Okay, so let's do that. So -3 times row 1. So everything times, it looks like it's going to be -3. So let's do -3 times each element of row 1. So -3 times 1 is 3. Hello, -3. That's -3. -3 times 1 is -3. -3 times 0 is 0. And -3 times 2 is -6. So just from watching me do the basic arithmetic of multiplication, you can see that you need to watch me and make sure that I don't make an error. So, okay, let's try to add those now. So the first row stays the same. We're not changing the first row. Second row is what's changing here. So 3 minus 3, 0. 6 minus 3, 3. -3 plus 0, -3. 3 minus 6, -3. And then the third row is not changing now either. All right, one more thing to 0 out. We've got to 0 out that -1 on the bottom of the first column. So we always multiply whatever row has the 1, that's row 1, by the opposite of what we want to 0 out. So we will be multiplying by a +1, adding that to the row we want to 0 out, which is row 3, and then replacing row 3. So the first two rows do not change at this point. Okay, we're multiplying row 1 times 1. Well, that's not going to change anything. So we're simply adding row 1 plus row 3. All right, so let's see what we get. -1 plus 1, that's 0. -2 plus 1 is -1. 2 plus 0 is 2. And negative 2 plus 2, 0. Okay, so things are looking good. Down the first column, we've got exactly what we want. Now we're going to work on column number 2. So in column 2, we really want A22 to be a 0. So that is a 3 right now. I'm sorry, I said 0. I meant 1. We really want A22 to be a 1. It's currently a 3. And so we want to change that to a 1. We can either change rows, which obviously we don't want to change with row 1 because we've got the 1 in the right position, but we could change with row 3. And the only reason I'm thinking of that is because it's already a 1, it's just a negative 1. So that's kind of what I'm leaning toward. So let's do that. So I'm going to interchange row 2 and row 3. So 1 does not change. I'm going to move up row 3 to row 2, and I'm going to move row 3. I'm going to move row 2 down to row 3. My goodness. Okay. Now I have a 1 in the position. It's a negative 1. So to get rid of the negative, I can multiply everything by a negative 1. So negative 1 times row 2, replace row 2. So 1, 1, 0, 2. Then 0, negative 1, negative 2, 0. So I just multiplied through by a negative 1. Man, I am making error after error. That should be a 1 and a negative 2 and a 0. Okay, so see, it happens to us all. This is why we need to be careful and not be in such a rush. I'm just kind of demonstrating bad behavior here. Okay, so let's see. We've got a 1 in A22, and now I want to zero out everything above and below that 1. So let's start by zeroing out the 1 in the top row. So A12 is a 1. Let me just highlight it. We want that to be a 0. So in order to accomplish that, we're going to multiply row 2 by negative 1, and then we're going to add that to row 1. And we're going to replace row 1 with that. Okay, let's see if we can get that done. So negative 1 times row 2. Negative 1 times 0 is 0. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 2 is plus 2. Negative 1 times 0 is 0. So let's see what we get when we add those things. 1 plus 0 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 plus 2, 2. And 2 plus 0, 2. That's the only thing we're changing right now. Oops, that's just a 1. Okay. Now to finish up column 2, we need that 3 in the bottom, this 3, to be a 0. So that's what we're focused on now. So to do that, we multiply the row with the 1, so that is row 2. We multiply that by the opposite of what we're trying to zero out. So since we're trying to zero out a 3, we multiply row 2 by negative 3. We add that to the row we're zeroing out, and then we replace that row. So row 1, unchanged. Row 2, unchanged. Okay, what we're changing is row 3. So negative 3 times row 2. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. And then negative 3 times 0 is 0. When we find the sums, we get 0 plus 0 is 0. 3 minus 3, 0. Negative 3 plus 6 is 3. And negative 3 plus 0 is negative 3. Okay, we're done with column 1. We're done with column 2. Now we're down to column 3. We need to have column 3 be all 1s and 0s. We want to first focus on, all right, we want to first focus on making the element in row 3, column 3, or A33, to be a 1. So to do that, I am going to divide everything by 3. Everything in row 3. In other words, I'm going to multiply by 1/3. So that will be 1, 0, 2, 2, 0, 1, negative 2, 0, and 0, 0, 1, and then negative 1. Okay, we're almost there. We need everything above that 1 to be zeros. So we have a 2 in the top, we have a negative 2 under that. So let's just start with row 1. So to get row 1, I would multiply row 3 by a negative 2, add that to row 1, replace row 1. All right, I'm running out of space, so I'm going to have to condense this here. So row 3 times a negative 2. So 0 times negative 2 is is 0. 0. Negative 2 times 0 is 0. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. And then negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2. And so when I find the sums, I will get 1, 0, 0, 4. Okay. Let's see, I think I can do the other one after that. All right, so last I need to get that negative 2 to be a 0. And so to do that, I'm going to multiply row 3 by a 2, add that to row 2, and replace row 2. So 1, 0, 0, 4 stays the same. Now I'm going to multiply row 3 by 2. So times 2. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. 2 times 1 is 2. And 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. So when we find that sum, or those sums, we'll get 0. 1 plus 0 is 1. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. And 0 minus 2 is negative 2. And then the last row. Okay, finally we're done. After that first one with all the fractions, I think that taxed my brain. I can't even do this one very well. But we finally got to the answer. I believe it's the correct answer. And so you'll see in this one we got nice integers as solutions. So due to space, I'm going to be putting my solutions up here. We have x equals 4, y equals negative 2, and z equals negative 1. You can also write this as an ordered triple, the x, the y, and the z. So 4, negative 2, negative 1. Thank you for hanging in there with me through that one. I had a hard time. I'm not sure if you did. Go to the OpenStax textbook if you want more practice with these. There are several that you can work through, so I'd highly recommend that.